Hello, Brian back. Uh, let's continue pathology under the topic called cell injury and the cell adaptation. Okay, we start just by defining what cell injury is, and we proceed to some of the mechanisms that normally happens for the cell to undergo certain stress or for it to completely die because of these injuries that might happen. Okay, so a cell injury is a sequence of events that happens when the cell has failed to undergo a certain stress. It's a sequence So it's a sequence of events that happens when the cell fails to overcome stress or an injurious stimulus. Okay? So we'll talk about this more on the other diagram that we see this side. Okay? So what normally happens is that you know that the cell has a component. It's called the nucleus. In this, we have what we call the chromatins, the nuclear envelope, and the nucleus inside here. So the function of this is to control all the activities of the cell that normally happens here. Okay. So we're going to talk about what normally happens when you now introduce a certain stress to this, to this cell. Okay? So what normally happens? What are the sequences? What happens? We now put in the stress to this cell. Okay? Number one, we know that a cell it can overcome a certain stress and heal itself. Number two, it's either it fails to adapt to that and it undergoes cell death. Okay, so let's come to this diagram. This diagram it automatically explains what normally happens if the normal homeostasis of hormonodynamic has been interrupted. What normally happens is that when there is stress and this injurious stimulus. Okay? So when there is stress, it's either the cell will adapt to that stress or it will undergo cell injury. Okay? So now what happens when these things happen? Okay? So number one, how does the cell adapt? So we'll talk about how the cell adapt. Okay, so we'll talk about 3 or 4 major ways in which the cell adapts to this stress. Number one is we talk of atrophy. Okay, what is atrophy? Atrophy is when now the cell has been introduced or it has been stressed. Now what happens is that the cell will reduce in its size, more like it will shrink. It will try to change its normal size. Like, okay, let me just give an example. The cell was big like this. This was the cell. Okay, and the plasma membrane here and the nucleus inside. So what happens when the cell now wants to adapt to this injurious or stress? What happens is that the cell will try to reduce in size. By reducing in size, we will now say from this size, it will now be like this. A small one, okay? We change the size. And the volume will also reduce. That is what we mean by it will reduce in the size and volume. The volume will reduce and the size will reduce. Okay. Number 2, we'll talk about the hyperplasia. Okay. What is hyperplasia? Hyperplasia is now when the cell is been stressed. Now it wants to overcome this stress. What happens is that the cell now, this cell will multiply itself to as many as possible. Okay, let me just say these are the cells. These are the cells. Okay, we're now explaining hyperplasia here. So let's now prepare for this. Let's now talk about it, the hyperplasia. What happened? So these cells, there are 3 in numbers. Okay, so they will try to increase in number so that they will be able to fight. These cells will multiply themselves to at least so this is hyperplasia now. From 3 now, you've seen that the numbers has changed from 3 to 6, which means there's an increase in number. Increase in the number of cells. Is what we call as hyperplasia. Okay? It is one way of which the cell helps itself to adapt. That is point number 2. So number 3, we'll talk about the hypertrophy. What is hypertrophy? Now, we just from explaining the point here, hyperplasia, okay, which is the increase in the number of cells. Okay, so now we want to explain the point here. What happens with this stress now? What happens under hypertrophy when the cell has been stressed? We've explained the point here, which is atrophy, and when we come to here, we've just cut this R and we put hyper. So R, it means something is reducing or in absence of something, but under this, we normally say it's atrophy, means it reduces in size. Okay. Hypertrophy, we now talk of the increase in the size of the cell. Okay, the increase in the size of the cell, the size of the cell now increases, also the volume increases. Let me give an example of this cell here. This is now hypertrophy. Okay, the normal cell is this. The normal cell is this, right? With the nucleus there and some cell components. Okay, so what happens here under hypertrophy is that the cell will increase in size. So let's take for instance this cell like this. This cell will now change in size and volume. The volume will increase now. Okay, we've seen that. At first it was like this, but it will now change in size to be bigger like this one. Okay, for it to overcome a certain stress. Okay, but if it is too much, the cell may undergo lysis or cell lysis, which will be cell breaking. Okay, but under this, you just take here, which is the increase in the size of the cell and the volume. So as you can see here, the volume has changed from this to this. That is what we call the hypertrophy. So it's the increase in size and the volume of the cell, tissue or organ. Okay, that is hypertrophy. Number 4, let's talk of metaplasia. Metaplasia. Okay, what is metaplasia? What is metaplasia under how a cell how the cell adapts to certain stress? Okay, so metaplasia is a way in which a cell tries to replace cells with another type of the cell so that it is able to overcome that kind of stress. Okay, let me give an example of, we know the types of cells. We have the tissues, we have some of the cuboidal cells, squamous cells, and those are the types of the cells I'm talking about. The squamous, the cuboidal, and the other one, which is, okay, let me just do this. Columnar cells. Okay, in the actual sense, you have these columnar cells. We have these columnar cells, okay? And here you have the basement membrane from which this cell, these columnar epithelial cells rest on, okay? So what happens is that when the cell is stressed, and of which these cells you are seeing here, they are failing towards this to help fight against that other stimulus. What happens is that the cell will try by all means to replace other cells, like the cuboidal cells on top here, as many as possible, so that this cell can undergo this stress and elevate it away from the body. So we can say metaplasia is a process by which the cell replaces the replacement of another cells. Let's say replacement of other cells in order to overcome the state or to overcome stress. Okay. So now back to this diagram. So this is what normally happens. The way of which this cell adapts is hypertrophy, the atrophy, the hyperplasia, and metaplasia. Okay, so this was explained under adaptation, cell adaptation. So now what happens when the cell has failed to adapt, these processes has failed. What normally happens is that the cell undergo injury. Okay, so